with an estimated 105% increase worldwide in 2021. American businesses, healthcare institutions, and local government entities have borne the brunt of ransomware attacks in the United States. An estimated 37% of businesses and over 2,300 schools, local governments, and healthcare organizations were hit by ransomware attacks in 2021.
I gotta fix something. Because I can't do anything on this computer while that's open. Bear with me. Bear with me 1 second. I just gotta drag this over here. All right, you guys ready for some news? Woo! What happened? Why'd that just... Get it just right. Just right.
And police departments are often underfunded and under-resourced. For many educators, the decision between patching software
you can do it,
systems
Steve. You can do it,
and
Steve.
textbooks is just one of the many painful decisions they have to make in what is often a thankless job. In these cases, a grant for new technology can mean updating systems and increasing accessibility, but also increasing risks with more opportunities for hackers to exploit system vulnerabilities. The Biden administration has acted to turn the tide on the ransomware cyber attack threat, and the FBI has played a central role in shoring up our defensive position. It has even begun recovering ransom payments from cyber criminals, as in the case of Colonial Pipeline. But these successes have not been without controversy. After the attack on Kaseya, the FBI withheld for weeks the decryption key it had recovered, which left many downstream businesses without the tools they needed to operate and cost those businesses many millions of dollars that could have been avoided had the FBI provided it immediately. Many people also raised privacy concerns in the wake of the attack on Microsoft Exchange. After the FBI discovered that the individual networks of private companies had been compromised by the Microsoft Exchange intrusion, it obtained warrants to alter victims' systems without their knowledge or permission. No sector needs more protection than our critical infrastructure. In 2021, ransomware was used to attack 14 out of 16 critical infrastructure sectors, including agriculture, financial services, energy, dams, and other often unseen but crucial industries that buttress American lives and businesses. In February 2021, an attacker attempted to poison the water in Oldsmar, Florida. In 2017, Russian government-affiliated cyber attackers hacked a third-party contractor and used the company's email to gain access to part of the American electrical grid. In April 2021, Chinese state-affiliated hackers breached New York's Metropolitan Transit Authority network, potentially exposing data and showcasing just how vulnerable our transit operational systems could be to attack. These are real threats. Blackouts and loss of electrical service could cripple our country's economy and paralyze our ability to respond to an attack. Without significant investment in IT systems and training, these industries will remain vulnerable. But the threat does not end there. State-affiliated cyber threat actors from Russia, Iran, and China have engaged in cyber espionage against our government and political systems, accessing critical data and loitering on our servers. American businesses have suffered breaches by cyber criminals looking for personal data as well. Looking for personal data to sell, I should say. While the Russian invasion of Ukraine has not yet spilled over into cyber attacks that affect governments and businesses in the United States, President Biden has warned all Americans of evolving intelligence that Russia may soon launch cyber attacks against the United States. Our ability as a country to respond to such an attack rests in the hands of the FBI and its partner agencies. The Biden administration has encouraged businesses large and small to adopt a shields-up posture to defend against cyber threats. Because it is the security of private companies, those that keep our lights on, provide life-saving health care, and teach our children, that will determine the fallout from an attack, we must all evolve to better protect our networks. This means strengthening our cybersecurity systems by patching vulnerabilities, training users how to recognize phishing attacks, and increasing network cybersecurity protocols. When we invest in our schools, local governments, and healthcare systems cybersecurity, we contribute to a safer country. We live in a technologically advanced nation of early adopters with private networks and the freedom to maintain our networks however we choose. There is no easy way to mitigate all cyber vulnerabilities in the United States, but by engaging in meaningful oversight of our nation's cybersecurity defenses, this committee can ensure we are ready to meet any threat head-on. I look forward to hearing from Assistant Director Vorndran on what he and his colleagues at the FBI Cyber Division are doing to keep our country safe and to engaging in an important discussion about the threats our networks face. I now recognize the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last week, the president said a cyber attack from Russia is coming. And what's the Biden administration been doing? They released Alexei Burkov, a notorious Russian cyber criminal. Here's what has been said about Mr. Burkov. He's an asset of supreme importance, one of the most connected and skilled malicious hackers ever apprehended by U.S. authorities. And what did the Biden administration do 6 months ago? Put him on a plane headed to Moscow. Cyber attack from Russia is coming, the president said. And what's our Justice Department been doing? We know they've been spying on Carter Page and not following the FISA rules. How do we know that? Because Inspector General Horowitz has done 2 different audits, 2 different reports that he's given to us. 400 errors in 29 randomly selected FISA applications, 400 errors in 29 of them. In 4 of those 29 applications, there wasn't even a Woods file, which is the file you keep that has the underlying supporting evidence for the claims made in the application itself. Cyber attack from Russia is coming, the president said. And what's our Justice Department been doing? Not only ignoring the FISA rules, they don't even follow their own rules. We know that from a story 2 weeks ago where in sensitive investigative matters, special cases dealing with First Amendment concerns when they're investigating religious groups, investigating candidates, and investigating government officials or the press, 353 cases, 747 errors in those cases. Not only are they not following the FISA rules, they don't even follow their own darn rules. That's why we sent a letter asking for the internal audit. We hope that that will be given to the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Chairman, so we can look at that. Cyber attack from Russia is coming, the president said a week ago. And what's been going over at the Justice Department? Well, we know this from Mr. Durham. They were spying on President Trump's campaign. Mr. Durham just told the court that last month. Tech executive number 1, spying on not only the President Trump's campaign, looks like spying on him during the transition period and potentially even while he was President of the United States. Cyber attack from Russia is coming. And of course, we learned just 4 months ago, what was our Justice Department doing? What are they still doing? Spying.
Hold on. I got to rant for a second. I turned down the wrong. I got to rant for a second. Listen, my wife was nice enough to make me a sandwich today, so I stopped buying lunch every day. And she's like, what do you want? And I'm like, Italian, you know, because I like Italian subs, right? This lady put it on wheat bread. Wheat bread. Wheat bread. My goodness. I mean, way to ruin an Italian sub, dear.
51 former Intel officials doing just a year and a half ago. They were telling us the whole Hunter Biden story was false. They told us it was Russian disinformation. The disinformation is what they told us. Something we need to check out. How did 51 of them in the days before a presidential election tell us a story that the New York Times has now said was absolutely true? The laptop was true, the eyewitness was real, and the emails and evidence and documents were real as well. So I look forward to today's hearing from our witness. But I think a fundamental question we got to ask is, how do you trust the Department of Justice to protect us from cyber attacks when they've been spying on presidential campaigns, spying on parents, telling us Hunter Biden was Russian disinformation, and releasing the most notorious Russian cyber criminal we've ever had? Simple question I'm going to have for our witness is, why did we let him go? What did we get for that? What kind of trade? What kind of a rate? What happened there? So, Mr. Chairman, I hope we get answers to these key questions, and I hope, again, we've talked about this now for months. We hope we can get the Attorney General back here to answer some questions about this whole school boards issue and some of the other things I raised in my opening statement. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Without objection, all other opening statements will be included in the record. I will now introduce today's witness. Brian Vorndran has served as Assistant Director of the Cyber Division of the FBI since March 2021. He joined the FBI as a special agent in the Washington Field Office in 2003 and has held a variety of positions since then, including serving as part of the International Contract Corruption Task Force in Afghanistan, Unit Chief in the Counterterrorism Division at FBI headquarters, and leading the Washington Field Office's Joint Terrorism Task Force. Mr. Vorndran also served as Assistant Special Agent in charge of the cyber and counterintelligence programs at the Baltimore Field Office, Chief of the Strategic Operations Section of the Counterterrorism Division at headquarters, and later as a Deputy Assistant Director of the Criminal Investigative Division. Prior to assuming his current position, Mr. Vorndran served as a Special Agent in charge of the New Orleans Field Office. Before joining the Bureau, Mr. Vorndran was an engineer for the Procter & Gamble Company and for Merck & Company. He earned a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Lafayette College and a Master of Business Administration from the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. We welcome our distinguished witness, and we thank you for participating today. I'll begin by swearing you in. I ask that you please rise and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record show that the witness has answered in the affirmative. Thank you, and please be seated. Please note that your written statement will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, I ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes. To help you stay within that time limit, there is a timing light on your table. When the light switches from green to yellow, you have 1 minute to conclude your testimony. When the light turns red, it signals your 5 minutes have expired. Mr. Vorndran, you may begin.
Chairman Nadler, Ranking Member Jordan, and members of this committee, thank you for providing me this opportunity to speak to you today about FBI cyber. Although the FBI investigates a wide range of threats, we're here today to talk specifically about the cyber threats facing our nation, the FBI's place in U.S. cybersecurity ecosystem, and the FBI's valuable role in identifying, disrupting, and imposing costs on America's cyber adversaries. The FBI Cyber Division turns 20 years old this year, and over that time, the American public has invested heavily to ensure the FBI has staff where it is needed most. Today, we have more than 1,000 cyber-trained personnel spread across 56 field offices and more than 350 sub-offices, and we can now put a cyber-trained agent on nearly any doorstep in this country within 1 hour of an attack. We have agents located in more than 70 countries working with our global law enforcement and intelligence counterparts. Some of these agents are dedicated to countering the cyber threat full-time, while others stand ready to support our cyber mission. Today, as you know, we're putting the FBI's decades of expertise countering foreign intelligence and investigating cyber threats in the United States to work against malicious Russian cyber activity. But we do not do it alone. Our emphasis on disrupting cyber adversaries, including through sharing information and enabling our partners, and our partners enabling us, is part of the FBI's continued move away from an indictments and arrest first mentality toward a playbook where we work with the government and industry partners around the world to execute joint sequence operations that impose the greatest possible cost on our adversaries. As this committee knows more than any other, sometimes an arrest and prosecution is the most decisive disruption. Like earlier this month when we were able to bring cyber criminal Yaroslav Vasinski to the inside of a U.S. federal courtroom for his role in the Kaseya attack, and the willingness of the Justice Department and the FBI to publicly attribute and expose damaging cyber intrusions by Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea has undermined those governments' denials and created a platform for U.S. allies to condemn destabilizing cyber activity while also undermining our adversaries' operations. Our focus, though, is investigating based on information we obtain from all sources: victims, foreign intelligence services, human sources, and our surveillance of adversary infrastructure, and then pushing it to whoever can do the most good for victims here and cause the most harm to hackers abroad. At the risk of making some enemies on this committee, I'll draw a comparison between the FBI's role in the cyber ecosystem and an event I attended 30 years ago yesterday when Duke beat Kentucky in the 1992 NCAA Men's Eastern Regional Final. Sometimes we're Grant Hill throwing the pass, and sometimes we're Christian Laettner taking the shot. Having said that, for the FBI to continue supporting our partners and executing successful operations ourselves, we need your support, even the Kentucky and North Carolina fans amongst you. As one of our key oversight committees and allies, your backing is crucial for our continued growth of authorities and resources. First, we appreciate Congress's action to pass a mandatory cyber incident reporting law, and we're looking forward to working with CIS and others to implement this legislation in a way that enables law enforcement to use incident reports to disrupt our cyber adversaries. At the same time, we need to be postured to continue hiring and retaining the right people to achieve our goals. At the FBI, we have been working hard to identify ways to better attract, train, and retain talented tech minds. Although we promote our mission to the greatest extent possible, the calling to protect American people and uphold the Constitution does not equate to paying off weighty student loans or entitle someone to a salary competitive with what's available in the private sector. We have found our struggles to pay those minds market value, even federal government market value, is often a deal breaker. We will continue to work with DOJ, OPM, the administration, and Congress to ensure we're able to properly pay and incentivize our cyber workforce. While we're trying to fill these seats with talent, passion, and patriotism, we're seeing the cyber threat grow exponentially. It now touches every program at the FBI. Cyberspace is where nation states go to learn our country's secrets. It's where criminals are extorting billions of dollars, and it's where wars are being waged. We are now at a critical juncture. We must keep pace with the expansion of the tools at our adversaries' disposal, and we need to see the same sense of urgency reflected in funding these programs through increases in our base budget. Yes, the people and technology the FBI Cyber Division needs to keep pace with these adversaries are expensive, but they're essential investments because cybersecurity equates to national security. I look forward to working with this committee on these topics and several other issues important to the success of the FBI and other U.S. government cyber programs. Chairman Nadler, Ranking Member Jordan, and members of this committee, thank you again for inviting me here today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for your testimony. We'll now proceed under the 5-minute rule with questions, and I will recognize myself for 5 minutes to start off. Mr. Vorndran, in September of last year, Howard University was forced to shut down much of its web services after a suspected ransomware attack took over its systems. K-12 schools are also enduring an increase in cyber attacks against their systems. Ransomware attacks in particular surged last year and continued in January. On average, education victims paid over $100,000 in ransom payments to decrypt their data and regain network access. Why are schools and higher education institutions a growing target, and who are the most common perpetrators of cyber attacks on schools?
Sir, I'm sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Who are the most common perpetrators of cyber attacks on schools?
Okay. Sir, what we found is that institutions or organizations with low cybersecurity budgets, and I think public schools for the most part would fall into that space, not because they're not trying, but the resources that are available to a K-12 school may be different than the resources available to a multinational company. It is hard to keep up with all the patching requirements, all the new operating systems. And so what we see is cyber criminals really preying on targets of opportunity. We see these criminals looking for opportunities more than precision attacks against one specific entity or one specific sector. And so when those criminals find a vulnerability in a traditional sector, they will continue to exploit it in hopes that they can make a lot of money off of it. In terms of who the most common perpetrators are, the bottom line is the most common perpetrators are cyber criminals. They are global, but the most heavy concentration is through Russian and surrounding countries in the Russian territory.
Thank you. In 2016, Russia attacked Ukraine's Ukrenergo, I hope I pronounced that right, electrical network, succeeding in causing a blackout, but failing to destroy the system. This attack was noteworthy because it was a case where the perpetrator attempted to use software to permanently damage hardware. Can you describe for us how software could be capable of destroying a hardware system? And do we know how many entities have developed or are seeking to develop this capacity?
One of the questions we typically ask is there a bleed over between what we would define as the IT and the OT system, essentially the information technology and the operational element of a company, of an organization, of an entity. And so firmware and hardware, different than software, still has the potential to have a lot of vulnerabilities that can be exploited by cyber adversaries. So the software bleed over would really be a question of, can the software being exploited actually affect the operational component? To your second part, it's really, really challenging question to answer what the scope and scale of those are. We just would point back to the fact that undoubtedly cyber criminals are going to work to find vulnerabilities where they can have the biggest impact, cause the biggest disruption, or make the most money off of those vulnerabilities being exploited.
It's been widely reported that on March 18th, the FBI warned the federal government of Russian hackers scanning the systems of 5 U.S. energy companies as well as other critical infrastructure. What's the significance of a foreign power scanning networks in our energy sector, and have instances of Russian scanning increased in the last month?
So, sir, instances of Russian scanning have increased. The significance of that is I would draw a comparison to traditional crime. In order for a criminal to conduct a bank robbery, it's undoubtedly true that that criminal is going to likely conduct reconnaissance surveillance to understand when the bank may be open, when the bank may be closed, what the security posture looks like. And the scanning of the scanning as you described it, really is a reconnaissance phase to understand what the net defense side of that company would look like and whether there are vulnerabilities that can or cannot be exploited. It's an extremely important part of the overall attack cycle.
Thank you. And my final question, can you explain for us the different ways the FBI is expanding its responses to cyber threats and how it can better serve victims of cyber attacks?
Sure. We always encourage a couple of key things. The first is to build a relationship with your FBI field office. We are all over this country and international as well. But for companies in this country or organizations, K through 12 schools would be included there. We encourage those entities to build a proactive relationship with their FBI cyber squad in their area. We'd also encourage them to build a proactive relationship with their CISA rep in the area because CISA is going to be very helpful as well and has some helpful resources. Independently of the government, all of those organizations need to have a defined incident response plan. They need to know who they're going to call in the moment they become a victim. They need to know who their insurance company is, who their attorney is, who they're going to call at the FBI, who they're going to call at CISA. We recommend that those are exercised every 90 days, not that they're drafted by a general counsel and put on the shelf and never thought of again. And then the third thing we say is if you do become a victim, we would ask that you report. You can report to CISA, you can report to the Bureau. It doesn't much matter to us. We'll synchronize on the backside to make sure that those companies have the weight of the U.S. government. In terms of things that we can do, sir, the list is potentially endless. We've been asked to help with the media before. We're willing to do that. We've been asked to help with victim services. If somebody's not going to get a paycheck, we're willing to do that. We've been asked to help take servers offline. We're willing to do that. We've been asked to simply take the indicators of compromise that are provided by that organization's third-party incident response firm and then move on to our investigation. We're happy to do that. It really is a menu of options that we can provide in that moment.
Thank you. My time has expired. Mr. Shabbat?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's estimated that the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center received nearly 2,500 complaints in 2020, which represented a 20% increase over the previous year. And over that same time, there was a 225% increase in ransom payoffs from nearly $9 million in 2019 to nearly $30 million in 2020. But it actually may be a lot worse than that because my understanding is if the payoffs that were reported were $30 million, there's a number of experts who believe it could be 10 times that amount. So we're looking at $350 million. So in other words, only 1 out of 10 of the incidences or even reporting it, 9 out of 10, they actually pay off the criminals. That same report estimated that cyber crimes, whether it's phishing or extortion or identity theft or data breaches of botnets, or that they all collectively cost the American businesses, and after all, small businesses especially employ about half the people in this country, about $4 billion with a B. And again, the chairman mentioned the Colonial Pipeline attack, which my understanding is was one of the most devastating ransomware attacks in U.S. history. And eventually, to contain that attack, the Colonial Pipeline made the decision to pay over $4 million to the criminals. And it turned out the decryption tool that was sent back to them in return for the payment wasn't particularly helpful in restoring the functionality to their networks, which is my understanding oftentimes the case. The good news, of course, is that the Department of Justice was able to track and to seize roughly, my understanding, about half of the payment that was made to the Russian-based hackers. But that still left about $2 million to the criminals to be used against future victims of malware crimes. And it's likely that the figures I've just mentioned only represent the tip of the iceberg of this ever-growing problem. Cybersecurity experts estimate that ransomware victims made an average payment of about $300,000 in 2020. They further suggest that when a company made a ransom payment, less than 1 out of 10 of them actually regained access in a reasonable amount of time to their hijacked data. Undoubtedly, cyber attacks are becoming more frequent. They're having larger impacts, and many, unsurprisingly, are connected to the governments, as has been mentioned, of both Russia and China. So, Mr. Vorndran, let me get to my questions. First, do you agree that of their ill-gotten gains, the payoffs basically that are made to these criminals, some significant portion of that is likely to go towards targeting the next victim or victims, that they're not donating this money, they're not donating it to the Red Cross or the American Cancer Society or the Little Sisters of the Poor. It's more people, the public or businesses, that are going to be targeted. Would you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
And that's what I'd like to focus on. We've got to make cybercrime, particularly the use of malware extortion, less lucrative, less profitable to these internet thugs. How about making it illegal to pay them off? After all, giving them money which we know they'll use to go after the next victim is sort of like aiding and abetting the next crime in some ways. Would you agree with that?
So, sir, if you're asking me if I think it's right to make the paying of ransoms illegal, I don't think that's a good decision. Okay. And the reason is because it creates a triple extortion model. And so in our current system, ransomware actors, cyber criminals can attack a company and hold an extortion for payment to get a decryption key. They can also extort that company or that organization to threaten to leak information, PII, of company employees or other sensitive information. That's the second of the 3 extortions. If you make the paying of ransoms illegal, you're creating a third extortion, which means that if a company chooses to pay and they have now broken the law, then a cyber adversary has the ability to hold them accountable for that in the public's eye and threaten them even more with a higher extortion. So we would actually recommend that that's not the best decision, but that's certainly just an FBI perspective.
Okay, well, I think it's something that certainly ought to be considered because what we're doing right now certainly has not worked. They're still doing it. They're getting more money than ever. Companies are actually allowed to write off on their taxes a payoff. Is that correct?
Sir, I don't know the answer to that question. I apologize.
Well, they are. They can do it, and I would argue that it's against public policy to allow that to occur. And then finally, some insurance companies, I understand, actually advise their clients that paying off the blackmailer is the cheapest course of action. Do you understand or have heard that?
So I think
Gentleman's time has expired. The witness may answer the question.
You want me to answer?
Yeah.
Sir, in terms of advisement of an insurance company to a victim, we think what we hear is that companies are put in a position to simply make a business decision. So when I go back to my position before I joined the FBI at Procter & Gamble, and we made a very large-scale manufacturing, I was told, hey, Brian, listen, An hour of downtime on this manufacturing line equates to this much revenue. And I think the business equation for any business that becomes a victim is simply that. If we're looking at restoring from backups taking 24 hours or 48 hours or 72 hours, and that equates to $4 million of lost revenue, and we can pay a ransom for $3 million, from a business decision, it's actually cheaper to pay the ransom. Now, to your first point, that just fuels the fire, and that just causes the criminal enterprise to grow stronger. So it is very much a vicious cycle.
Thank you. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. Ms. Lofgren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Vorndran, for your testimony and for your appearance before the committee today. You know, most computer systems and transactions with sensitive information.
I've lost interest in that hearing. There's another hearing I think would be better suited. This one is the Committee on the Judiciary that's meeting to discuss Foia requests. I think that would be, I think that's going to be more interesting. I think that's more up our wheelhouse today in terms of news that I want to play because, well, what we were just watching is boring. Fuck did it go? Where did it go? Yeah, this is hearings to examine the Freedom of Information Act. They have the U.S. Department of Justice officials that are testifying. This is going on, so we're going to jump into it live. So yeah. You ready? Are you ready?
And namely, as my colleague at OGIS,
I got to change that title. So hold on.
Identified as well. Resources to remediate records to make them accessible under Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act was a significant challenge for some agencies. So we are still encouraging agencies to make proactive disclosures, and some agencies have and are implementing that at a release to one, release to all level. The FOIA Improvement Act of 2016 codified the principle of posting records that have been requested and released 3 or more times, and we are certainly not encouraging agencies. All of our training and guidance is reinforcing that requirement, which in a sense prioritizes the resources for those requests and records that have shown a level of public interest. But certainly we are encouraging proactive disclosures. Our focus on proactive disclosures is significant. We have a whole chapter on proactive disclosures in our Chief FOIA Officer reports. And so we want to continue working towards a time where agencies can have the capacities to get to the point where they can release more and more records on their websites, getting to a release to one, release to all.
See, this question's been asked, so I'll go to GAO. I'm going to a GAO report, but to ask you my last question, Mr. Tabayan. Released earlier this year revealed concerning details about how long agencies are taking to process FOIA requests, and I won't go into those statistics because I gave them in my backlog. But when there's a presumption of openness, why is FOIA requests so complex? Could you explain specifically what makes a request complex?
Certainly, and I will say that in our reports, in our CFR reports, we do ask agencies about the challenges, and this is the most consistent reason, is the increase in the complexity of their requests. Agencies are more and more seeing requests. They're not just asking for 1 or 2 records. That could be multi-part, 15 different types of categories of records or types of records that involve multifaceted searches and complicated searches in records in all different formats. And then these records could be voluminous at times and involve multiple consultations within the departments or with agencies. So these are significant challenges. The requesters, the bar for requesters of what they can ask is not very high, and we want, we're in the service of providing government records and informing the public. But the complexity of the request has certainly increased, and I'm seeing that in my office, and I know agencies have reported in their CFR reports.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Grassley. Senator Feinstein.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. My conclusion from this is there is a big problem. And if I understand this correctly, in 2020, we received a report from the Government Accountability Office entitled Freedom of Information Act, Federal Agencies' Recent Implementation Efforts. That report contained a number of interesting findings. For example, the report concluded that the backlog of requests under the Freedom of Information Act had grown more than 80% since 2012. Over the same time period, the costs to litigate those requests have risen by 69%. So that's a big problem. And I'd like to know what each member in the panel believes is causing that. My just sort of quick look at the situation is that your volume has increased exponentially, and the ability to respond to it perhaps has not as much. So if I could go through the panel and just see what your reaction is, I'd appreciate that.
Senator Feinstein, as has been mentioned here earlier, complex requests have been a factor most cited by agencies. Technology is wonderful, but what it means is that the public has access to technology, which can just
So
really...
you're saying there are more requests dominantly, and that's the problem?
That's a big factor, and of course litigation as well. And litigation stems primarily from the inability for agencies to meet the statutory timeframes. Okay. Those are the two biggest issues that we identified.
Got it.
Yes, Senator Feinstein, these are the complexity and the volume of requests are certainly the most common that we see in our agency CFO reports, was this also what GAO found. In addition, compounded by some of the challenges that agencies have not seen coming in the past few years. As I mentioned in my opening testimony, going back 3 years, we had a lengthy government shutdown where agencies couldn't process requests, I believe, for about a month, and that went straight into the pandemic. All of these have a compounding impact, but certainly the complexity and the volume of requests is a significant challenge.
Well, is it correct? My understanding is that in 2021, the federal government received over 800,000 Freedom of Information Act requests, up 6% from just the year before. So obviously processing all of those is a serious undertaking. I guess what I'm looking for is what should we do?
Well, we're taking a number of steps in my office to help agencies meet these demands. From both our role in providing guidance to ensure.
Could you speak directly into the mic?
We're providing a lot. We're taking a lot of steps in my office to help agencies meet these demands, the ever increasing demands, both in terms of providing our guidance and training, but also in providing best practices and workshops on effective systems to process requests, communication with the requester, which we've found key and have had.
That hasn't done it, if I understand the statistics correctly.
It has helped us achieve. I mean, while the agencies have received a high volume of requests, we've also been able to process over the years a high volume of requests, and I think a lot of that is towards those efforts. And we're continuing to work on this.
Well, it would seem to me that don't we need to improve the process of responding to those requests? I mean, if you're going from a situation where there are few to where there's a huge number, which appears to me to be the case, the reasons have to be collated, found if there are good reasons that we do something about it. And I don't know that that's happening now. Any comment?
I can assure you, Senator Feinstein, we're doing everything in our office that we can to help agencies.
So what you're saying is that the volume is going up intensively, that we've received 800,000 Freedom of Information Act requests, and that's up 6% from 2020.
I believe that's right. And since 2012, where the GAO report was focused, the number of requests received and processed have increased steadily.
So my question is, what do you recommend we do about it?
Senator Feinstein, that's the reason I come to work every day, is to try to help agencies with these challenges, and we've seen significant improvements. While backlogs can remain a challenge, significant number of agencies do in the government have low backlogs and maintain low backlogs. We've also, as I said, have a lot of examples in chief FOIA officer reports where agencies have made internal improvements and have individual success stories. So we'll continue to work with agencies in our role to be able to help them
Is the
implement the FOIA.
backlog continuing to increase?
Since
Yes or no?
we have seen the backlog ebb and flow and have a steady increase over time.
Well, then we clearly need to do something about it. So it would seem to me that it would be useful if there were proposals to us of what we should do.
And we remain steadfast commitment to improving FOIA administration and would be happy to work with the committee on any legislative proposals.
Thank you.
Okay, thank
We'll
you.
go to Senator Cornyn.
Thank you all for being here today, and thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Leahy for having this hearing. I think Senator Leahy has pointed out something that we've all seen, and that is we're really fighting human nature in a sense, because we're all happy to trumpet our successes and not so happy to trumpet our failures, or where government's not working the way it should. But nevertheless, we all recognize that the very legitimacy of government itself is based on consent of the governed, and obviously the public can't consent to laws and regulations that they don't know anything about. And so hiding information either by advertence or inadvertence is a real problem. Ms. Simo, when your office was created, the Ombudsman's office, the whole idea was to give requesters an informal means to get information without having to jump through all the hoops and the time and delay of litigation and the like. Can you speak to how well that informal dispute resolution process is working?
Thanks for that question, Senator Cornyn. Yes, since we opened our doors in 2009, we have helped thousands and thousands of requesters. And since the FOIA Improvement Act of 2016, which provided the opportunity for agencies to inform requesters of our services at any point during the FOIA process, we saw a huge increase at the beginning. We have approximately 4,000 or so requesters that we help every year. And now we're seeing them at all different stages of the FOIA process. We see them at the very beginning. They haven't even filed a FOIA request yet, so they're asking for help about where to file. Sometimes we see them after the initial response from the agency. They're baffled. They don't understand. We try to help explain. Or we're seeing them after the appeal and before they want to file litigation. So we're seeing them at all sorts of stages in the process. And we're certainly doing our best to assist them and educate them about the FOIA process.
Of course, the agencies are responding to the requests made by citizen requesters, and it may be that the request is not clear, or maybe it's broad. And is that an area where you can help them target their requests so that the agencies can be more responsive and to exactly what it is that the requester wants?
Sure, we certainly have worked with requesters to hone their requests, and we also encourage them to work with the FOIA public liaison at every agency, who actually knows much more about what the records are that that agency possesses, to try to hone in their requests. We've also heard some frustration from requesters about the fact that their requests are getting shut down too quickly because agencies say they're overbroad and lack specificity. So, we try to follow up with agencies to find out, what is happening and try to resolve some of those bottlenecks.
Mr. McTeague, you mentioned litigation. I imagine litigation over these records is a cause for further delay and certainly expense. Are there means that the United States government could embrace, for example, some sort of other alternative dispute resolution process that might save time and money and expedite the receipt of the requested information?
Well, I think in OGIS we have just such a capability. Beyond that, we haven't really studied the issue, but some of the other methods that we talked about, including proactive disclosure, certainly could help that situation. Also, I think some of the lessons that agencies learned during the pandemic, in part in response to guidance put out by OIP, and I point to interim releases where agencies worked with requesters to help focus or narrow the scope of a request and produce information in a more timely manner that may not have been the full extent of the request, but sometimes that actually satisfied the requester's needs. So I think there are some lessons learned that we can apply going forward in a non-pandemic environment that may help chip away at the backlogs.
Are we still seeing, for example, individuals, citizens requesting, for example, their own records using the FOIA process? It strikes me as a real dysfunction of the federal government where a citizen is requesting their own records, let's say from the Veterans Administration, and then they have to file a public information request for that. I mean, that ought to be a basic government service like any service company or industry. Can you speak to that category of requests, maybe Ms. Simo?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, actually, this goes back to the new AG FOIA guidelines that were issued. We noted that the newly issued guidelines continue to encourage efforts of agencies to remove barriers to requesting and accessing government records, these first-party requests. And in particular, they cited an announcement that the Executive Office for Immigration Review, EOR, would be changing its policy and no longer requiring individuals to file FOIA requests to obtain copies of their own records, which we think is dovetails perfectly with the efforts of the FOIA Advisory Committee. The FOIA Advisory Committee has been studying that very issue, how to pivot away from using FOIA to access frequently requested records such as immigration files, Social Security benefits information, veterans benefits. And we also were very pleased to see that the AG's guidelines encouraged other agencies other than DOJ to examine whether they have similar or other categories of records that they could make more easily accessible without requiring individuals to file FOIA requests.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Cornyn. Chair Durbin.
Thank you much, Chairman Leahy and Senator Cornyn. Senator Grassley was here earlier. I know this is one of his subjects of great passion and interest, and he deserves great credit, as does Chairman Leahy, for their work in this area. So there are two areas that stand out as I look at the GAO report, which I thank the agency for. And the first one seems to be the volume question and the fact that, as has been said and repeated, from fiscal years 2012 to 2020, the government-wide backlog of FOIA requests increased by 97%. We're all trying to get to the bottom of this, and the GAO report helps us understand. How much of this, Mr. McTighe or others, how much would you associate with our new mode of communication? In other words, we're not requesting documents, copies of documents, so much as communications through high-tech means, whether it's a text or an email or a tweet or whatever. Has this transformed the whole conversation about FOIA?
Senator Durbin, as I actually mentioned this in my opening statement, that we're seeing records and volumes in different forms that weren't could not have been envisioned when FOIA was enacted. So I do think that that does have an impact on the complexity and the volume of records that might be responsive to a request.
And just first glance, I would say it's difficult to cull out the things that are relevant and important as opposed to those that aren't when we start dealing with these massive increases in volume. They are all in the nature of a communication, either sent or received. And is my starting point right? It's difficult to grade those in any generic way. They have to be looked at specifically.
Yeah, we look at every record and apply the FOIA faithfully with the requirements of the FOIA. I look at our business to be the business of transparency. And so this is a challenge, a modern day challenge, but it's one that we're working to meet the FOIA's demands.
So is there any speculation about using artificial intelligence to make this a more precise delivery of information?
Certainly, we're definitely looking at advanced technologies, including artificial intelligence, to help us with the search and even maybe the processing of records. And this is something that we've been very proud as co-chairs of the FOIA Officer Technology Committee, have a working group on artificial intelligence. We held a workshop as a primer for FOIA professionals to learn about artificial intelligence and see it certainly as the next wave of tools that are going to be significantly helpful for administering the FOIA in the modern day.
Is our federal government flirting with the idea or serious?
I would say we're very serious. We want the best tools because at the end of the day, we want to be as responsive and apply the law as fully and effectively as we can.
Let's move to the second item that came off as important to me in the GAO report, and that's the question of litigation. Can you describe in general terms the proliferation of litigation, how it occurs, and at what level?
Certainly, we've seen actually this past year litigation did dip actually slightly, but since 2012 there's been a steady increase in litigation. It's a small percentage of the 800,000 requests that agencies receive and process, but it does demand a significant amount of resources. And we see litigation coming in all different types.
Give me a couple examples that you think really account for the largest increase.
Well, certainly when there is a topic of significant interest, a FOIA requester might be incentivized to file a lawsuit closer to the statutory timeline, where depending on the complexity of the request, the agency may not have the ability to respond to that request within the 20 or 30 days. That's certainly one example.
Can you give me a more specific example, the type of thing that the ordinary person would understand? Oh, that's what a FOIA litigation is all about.
Well, first and foremost, Senator, for us, we want FOIA litigation to be the last resort. And so we encourage and try to advertise all the different avenues before a agency or requester gets into FOIA litigation. One of the key ways that we do that is one through communication. We have multiple articles of guidance that stress the importance of communication, so that if you're talking to the requester, you can explain to them why maybe they do have a complex request. They may not understand how our record systems work or why their request is complex, and that we can work together to provide maybe a more simplified request that gets them the records they want in a much quicker time. We've seen that to be a proven success story. Also, when that doesn't work, issuing interim responses, not waiting until the entire request can be responded to, but providing records as you can, so that the requester can see, oh, well, this is what I was interested in. Maybe they're not interested in going forward. Or once they see a selective response, they can maybe be more confident in tailoring their request to be simpler. Also, each agency, we have guidance on the importance of FOIA requester service centers and FOIA public liaisons to work with requesters, not only explaining their handling of FOIA requests, but to do dispute resolution. We also advocate for very robust, we have guidance comprehensive on the administrative appeal process, where a requester can go to the agency and get an independent review of the agency's initial action. And then finally, it has been long-standing our policy in administrative response letters to notify the agencies of OGIS's mediation services. And since the codification of the FOIA Improvement Act, including those also in our initial response letter. So we want to give all these different tools and avenues for the FOIA requester not to have to seek FOIA litigation. And that's really where we put all our effort.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand Senator Blackburn is joining us remotely. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. I had been in the room when you gavelled, and I am going to come to you remotely. I do have a couple of questions. I wanted to go to the public interest standard. Congress enacted the foreseeable harm standard in 2016. Of course, we all know that, and I want to see where each of you are on the issue of having a public interest balancing test to require the agencies consider the public's interest and balance that against the interest of the agency and the interest the agency seeks to protect by withholding requested information. And Ms. Simo, if I'll start with you, and then if everyone will weigh in on that.
Thank you for that question, Senator. I can say that we have heard from the requester community, there's a lot of interest in, I'm not sure where to look. There's a lot of interest in the proactive disclosure standard being applied to more than one exemption. There is certainly a perception that it should be applied to all the exemptions. And I think from Otis's perspective, we see some issues associated with applying it to every single exemption. For example, exemption 1, national security. We think public interest may not be appropriate to be applied there. So we're very happy to work with the committee if there's a legislative proposal, and we would like to consider it further.
Thank you.
Senator, yes, Senator, we are steadfast in our commitment to applying all the requirements of the FOIA, including the presumption of openness and the foreseeable harm standard, as far as any legislative change or legislative proposal. I can't speak to anything along those lines today, but the department stands committed and would be ready to work with the committee on any legislative proposals.
Okay, Mr. McTeague.
Yes, Senator. As embodied in FOIA, there is a balance between public disclosure and the need to withhold information. A lot of thought was put into the crafting of FOIA by the Congress and the committee, and I would defer to the Congress on that.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Emo, I want to come back to you on the backlog site. In the report that we got, it was attributed, much of the backlog was attributed to the general increase in litigation as kind of a challenge. And so I'd like for you to just talk a little bit about how you've changed the standard on these complex requests.
Thank you for that question, Senator. And I didn't have a chance to answer earlier when Senator Feinstein asked a question, but from our perspective, we see the primary challenges for FOIA today is a lack of resources, confusion about the FOIA process, and a continued lack of communication between requesters and agencies. We definitely continue to see FOIA to be largely a resource issue. I want to point out, I believe Mr. Talibian already pointed out, litigation is a very small percentage. I believe we usually cite 1% of all the FOIA requests that the federal government receives. It does prove to be very time-consuming for agencies. We certainly hear stories that agencies are inundated with litigation and are having trouble meeting that.
Okay, let me ask you this, and Mr. Talibian may want to jump in on this. Does this attribute to the increase in the denials, the complex nature, the litigation, because we know that the denials have increased by 32%?
Thank you for that question. When we look at the calculations of and if you're talking about the full denials,
Yes.
we, in looking at it as far as a percentage of the requests that the agency process in a given year, we don't see a meaningful increase. Obviously, the more requests that agencies process, the more opportunities for different dispositions. Ultimately, the dispositions of a request will come down to the nature of the records being requested, and the appropriateness of their release. That's why our office is fully committed to ensure agencies have the proper training, guidance, and the resources to properly apply the FOIA, regardless of volume, and apply it with a presumption of openness.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us. And I'll now yield to Senator Whitehouse.
Thanks, Chairman. Thanks to the panel for being here. I want to discuss a particular aspect of FOIA enforcement related to Exemption 5, the exemption for so-called pre-decisional materials. The logic of that exemption is that the chief executive is entitled to a robust debate among his or her subordinates in order to make the best quality of decisions. And those subordinates should not be playing to the galleries in the recommendations that they make in those debates. And therefore, the pre-decisional memoranda and conversations that lead to an agency decision should be protected. Is that a pretty fair description of what that's all about, Mr. Tlaib?
Yes, the exemption protects pre-decisional and deliberative information, but of course we also apply the foreseeable harm.
So the concern that I have is that DOJ recently has tried to apply that exception, that exemption, in a case where there was no decision to be made. And when I say no decision to be made, I mean no formal agency decision to be made. I think there's a difference between a formal agency decision or a formal decision by the head of the agency and just the day-to-day decisions that people make all day long, the quotidian decisions about where you go next and what you eat for lunch and when you have your meetings and who's in the meeting. And everything in life is a decision. So if the exception is not going to swallow the rule, it has to connect to an actual agency decision that presumably has to be a formal agency decision. And what has happened in this case is that the Department of Justice, defending an internal report of its own that connected to no agency decision because there was a policy that drove the decision. So there was no decision to be made because the policy already existed and drove the outcome, was, I think, a very extreme view of the reach of pre-decisional. And I think once you untether Exemption 5 from an actual agency decision, it swallows the rule, and you will be enmeshed in enormous litigation, and there's no real discipline to decide, other than the agency's own prerogative, what it wants to disclose or doesn't want to disclose. So could you tell me, just for starters, what your role, Mr. Tlaib, is in the establishment of the substantive rule at the department regarding the Exemption 5 and what is pre-decisional? Do you actually give advice about that, or are you more implementing advice that OLC and others have come up with? Let me just ask it that way.
Senator, my area of expertise is the FOIA, and I provide guidance on the FOIA to the department as well as agencies government-wide.
The case that I'm referring to is in litigation in the DC Circuit right now as Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington versus the United States Department of Justice. Did you advise the department in that matter? The substance was a report that was done related to the Mueller investigation, so-called. And the subject of the report was whether the President of the United States could be charged. And because the department had a policy that the President of the United States could not be charged with a criminal offense, period, end of story, it did not strike me or, frankly, courts as pre-decisional. Were you involved in advising the department with respect to that question?
Senator, that, as you mentioned, is a case that's currently pending before the DC Circuit Court of Appeals. As a matter of longstanding DOJ policy, I can't comment on ongoing litigation.
I'm not asking you to comment on litigation. I'm asking you to just ask whether you participated in that discussion.
It's I can't speak to the internal processes of the department, especially with ongoing litigation.
I can't speak to whether you, as the person charged with giving advice, actually gave advice in this matter.
Senator, I can tell you that as part of processing of requests for the senior leadership offices, I was involved, but so are many others, and I cannot speak to ongoing litigation.
I don't ask you to speak to ongoing litigation. I'm a former attorney general and U.S. attorney. I'm well aware of that distinction, but I asked you a completely different question, which was, did you have a touch point on this in your role?
Yes, OIP was involved in that FOIA case.
Bingo. See, that was actually pretty easy once you got around to answering it. The reason I bring this up for the members is that in addition to the decision the department has made to allow itself to claim this exemption even when there's no actual decision, which allows the exemption to just run wild through the agencies, they've also taken the position that congressional requests for information are governed by FOIA. And so, as a member of Congress, if we are asking an agency for materials under the United States Constitution, exercising our right of oversight, we have to go through all the FOIA hoops. And so when the department is setting up its rules for how and when it responds to FOIA requests, how and when the executive branch responds to FOIA requests, they are also de facto setting up the rules for how we in Congress can get access to the information that is necessary to do our jobs. And I think we need to pay a lot more attention, not just to FOIA as an avenue for the public to hold agencies accountable, but to the question of FOIA as a screen behind which the executive branch can hide from congressional oversight. And I'll close by asking unanimous consent that my brief in that Crew case be made a matter of record in this committee hearing, which is joined by the chairman, I should add.
Without objection.
Very grateful to him and also Senators Wyden and Blumenthal and Hirono and Warren and Booker for participating in that brief. Thank you. My time has long expired.
Order. And I have testimony from the Center for Investigative Reporting, Open the Government Project and Government Oversight and Public System, and ask consent those be inserted in the record, and they will be. I would note for the Senator from Rhode Island, sometimes I find on another committee that I chair, appropriations, that sometimes I find that asking questions when an agency's budget is before us, I get the answers a little quicker than I might with FOIA.
Just an observation, right, Chairman?
Just a coincidence.
Just a coincidence.
Purely coincidental.
Senator Tillis, who has been very active on this and has sat here patiently all day. Senator Tillis, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here. Mr. Talibian, I know that at least based on the information my staff had provided me, that the B3 exemptions seem to have gone up substantially over the years. I think between 2017 and 2019, it's almost 91% increase. Can you describe to me what factors would lead to that increase in exemptions?
Certainly. And again, when we've looked at it with regard to comparing it to the percentage of requests processed from year to year, it's not nearly as significant. But I think the important thing to note about Exemption 3 is that it's incorporating into the FOIA the non-disclosure provisions of other statutes where agencies generally do not have any discretion. If the information applies, they must protect. But we're at OIP doing a number of things to make sure that agencies properly apply the Exemption 3 statutes. One, we're providing agencies with updated lists of what courts have found to qualify as Exemption 3 statutes, so they know that these courts have said these are proper Exemption 3 statute. Secondly, as agencies are reporting in their annual report, Exemption 3 statutes that we cite, we look and review the ones that have not qualified by the courts or have not been reviewed by the courts to ensure that we believe that they have the proper elements of Exemption 3. And then we make that list available so agencies can see what we are seeing as proper Exemption 3 statutes. Additionally, we have a FOIA counsel service line where we invite agencies to reach out to us if they have a question of whether an Exemption 3 statute applies, is an Exemption 3 statute, and whether the information they're reviewing, if they have any questions of whether it fits within that statute.
Just back on the broader issue of backlog, what is the Attorney General's office doing? I think Ms. Seema mentioned resources. What specific actions are you all taking or request before Congress that can help reduce the backlog, up to and including some of the backlog I have to believe has to do with COVID-19 and the workplace challenges?
Thank you, Senator. So as the AG's guidelines emphasize, timely disclosure is a key element of the presumption of openness. And we're looking at a number of ways to attack or try to reduce the backlog, including helping agencies find the right technology, making sure they have effective systems in place. And so we do a lot of that too with our reporting. We ask agencies to explain and review their systems to make sure they have effective systems, reassess and assess their technology to make sure they're equipped with the right technology to process requests. We also have a self-assessment toolkit. We encourage agencies to use an evidence-based, objective approach based off our toolkit to looking at each part of their FOIA process to see if there's needs for improvement. Through all these many ways, we're trying to help agencies, and we look forward to building on that.
Are there any specific actions that we could take that would help facilitate that process, congressional action?
I really appreciate your commitment to FOIA, and the department stands ready and would be happy to work with the committee on any legislative proposals, reviewing any legislative proposals.
Okay. Mr. McTeague for the GAO is basically the same question.
Yes, I just reiterate, resources are always an issue. Investment in technology is expensive, but needs to be continuous. But I also emphasize what we heard from a number of agencies and OIP and OGIS as well, and that is the investment in people. The nature of the challenge is changing. Some of the witnesses have talked about the technology we have today was never envisioned when FOIA was first passed, and that has created the ability for the public, which is good, to access more information very efficiently. The government has to keep up with that technology and the training of people. It's not just a matter of collecting paper records anymore. It's complex information retrieval and data management systems, and people trained to operate and manage those systems.
Are there specific people, process, technology projects underway right now? That instead of just incremental changes to underlying systems, are there any major projects or proposed projects underway within the agencies?
One agency that we looked at in our current review, the Department of Labor, has a multi-year project to upgrade their system, and they continued moving that project ahead during the pandemic. It's still yet to be complete, but there's hope there. And other agencies that we worked with also were looking, planning, and hoping to invest in their systems. But I defer to my other witnesses.
Ms. Seema?
Senator, yes, I was just going to bring up the fact that last month we sponsored OIP and OGIS co-sponsored a next generation FOIA tech showcase where we invited 18 different private vendors to come and speak about their technology. And we had a significant agency participation. A number of agencies are looking at different technologies. 20 agencies in particular are in a tough place because FOIA Online, which is their portal that they communicate with requesters, is, as we understand it, being sunsetted by EPA in 2023. So they're really interested in trying to find different technology that they can use. But technology costs money. A lot of agencies can't afford the technology that is out there. There's some great technology, but it's very expensive.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Tillerson. Thank you for your work in this area. I think, I'm told Senator Ossoff is going to join us remotely. Is that correct? Senator
Yes, thank
Ossoff,
you, Mr. Chairman.
go ahead.
And thank you to our panelists. Thank you for your service. Mr. McTeague, I want to pick up a point you just made to Senator Tillis. You noted that digitization has, in some ways, increased the demand for FOIA production and made it easier for citizens to place broader and more frequent requests. And you noted that these records are, decreasingly paper records or cards or microfilms, but increasingly the records themselves are digitized. What's the relationship between the digitization of records storage by the government and the capacity of agencies to produce such records when requested by the public via FOIA?
Senator Ossoff, we actually did not look specifically at that issue. I would defer to the other witnesses who may have relevant information.
Sure, Mr. Talibian, why don't you take a crack at that? This, I think, is a basic question about how FOIA is operating in the context of new technology.
Yes, certainly. I would say we still are receiving requests that would implicate both electronic and paper records. But as we are having new forms of electronic communication, certainly if you think back to prior to email, the number of records and the types of records that were being preserved and that would be requested were way different. As we get into this new age of even more different forms of communication, we're working with our records management laws, policies, and experts to be able to more efficiently search those records and provide responsive records.
Yeah, what part of the process of response is the most staff time intensive?
Well, I would say that would potentially depend on the type of request. So depending on the request, it could be that the search, because it requires a multifaceted search, a complicated search of different areas, and potentially a lot of key terms, or that could certainly contribute. But also, if the request is broad, has voluminous records that are responsive, calling through those records, and then also weighing the equities, having multiple consultations that are required. So then the actual processing of the request could be very time consuming. So it's really dependent on the request, and any part of that process could require a significant amount of resources depending on the request.
Are there agencies that store significant digital records in non-machine readable formats, or that have not run processes to make those records searchable?
So I don't have, in our reporting, I think anything that I could point to that.
Okay, will you find out?
I'm sorry?
Will you find out, please?
I could take that back and see if we can look into it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Talibian, I want to talk about the 1984 interpretation by OIP with respect to the definition of withholding information from Congress. FOIA states the executive branch cannot use the law, quote, to withhold information from Congress. It doesn't say to withhold information from congressional committees, nor does it say to withhold information from committee chairs, nor does it say to withhold information from Congress pursuant to resolutions passed by Congress. Nevertheless, OIP's interpretation is that requests from individual members don't trigger the special access procedures under FOIA, and that it must be from a committee or a committee chair. What is the negative impact of that, Mr. Talibian, on the ability of Congress and members of Congress to access information in the public interest?
So, Senator, the purview of my office and my area of expertise is specifically to responding to FOIA requests. Our Office of Legislative Affairs works with the Committee on Congressional Oversight requests.
Yeah, this is OIP guidance from 1984. So unless I'm mistaken, Mr. Talibian, this is your office. OIP guidance states that individual members of Congress are not entitled to access, consistent with our oversight responsibilities on the basis of this law, that it must only be committee chairs committees or the bodies as a whole. Are you familiar with this OIP guidance?
Yes, Senator, and to the extent I could say we are committed to applying the provisions FOIA to the full extent that we believe is appropriate and possible. But as far as congressional oversight requests within or beyond that, I would defer to our Office of Legislative Affairs.
I'm not asking about requests beyond that. Does OIP have any plans to review or reconsider this 1984 guidance? It's been a long time, and there are many who credibly argue, I believe, that this interpretation prevents members of Congress from securing records that are necessary for us to fulfill our oversight obligations.
Senator, I appreciate that, and I will take that back as well, and we'll respond.
Okay, so you'll send me, please, something written, a decision whether or not OIP will revisit that guidance?
I will take a look at that guidance and take it back and provide your response.
Okay, with your indulgence, Mr. Chairman, just one more question.
If the Senator just yield for a moment, I wasn't quite sure I understood that answer. Are you going to respond to the Senator's question? And if so, I would want that response to come to the committee also. But are you saying you will respond to the Senator's question, or you're going to take it back and consider it?
I'll be happy to take it back and provide a response.
Thank you. Go ahead, Senator Ossoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. This is a question for Mr. Talibian and for our witness from GAO, Mr. McTeague. It's a question about how wide the gap is between FOIA as it was envisioned and FOIA as it's been implemented. My impression is that the chasm is massive. It's vast. We're talking about timelines that are worse than routinely unmet, but almost never met. We're talking about massive backlogs. First of all, Mr. McTeague, is that a valid characterization or is that too harsh?
Well, I would say that during the pandemic, backlogs did increase considerably from, 120 to 142,000 requests. And 16 agencies had backlogs in excess of 1,000 requests. So I'll just state the facts.
Mr. McTeague, my impression is that we're talking about also simply routine noncompliance. Folks have to either sue or somehow get a special counsel investigation in the case of noncompliance. Powerful media organizations have a difficult time getting records to which they're entitled via litigation through FOIA, let alone ordinary people. I mean, how vast is the gap between what this law was intended to do, a presumption of openness, opening government records to the public, and its implementation in practice?
Well, I think if you look at the percent of requests that were denied and partially denied, I think the most recent data that we looked at showed only about 4% were denied outright. Partial denials were in the range of about 40%. That number has gone up since 2012, where it was about 30% of requests received or processed. The outright denials has actually gone down since 2012.
And timeliness?
Timeliness has bounced around, no real perceivable trend.
Mr. McTeague, thank you. Thank you to our witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you. We will leave the record open for a week in case other senators wish to submit questions. I would, I think of the problem we have, and this is caused a lot of it by Congress, with ATF, for example, having paper records. And I know what a frustration that is to law enforcement and prosecutors because of that. But I'm going to ask a question for both Director Simo and Director McTeague. If you had to highlight just one or two interventions for either Congress or agencies to make in order to fundamentally improve our FOIA system, what would they be? And Director Seymour, please answer that, and then Director McTeague.
Senator Leahy, thanks for that question. We actually provided some recommendations in our last annual report to Congress. So we really invite you to go back to look at those, but I just want to summarize them. Several of them come from recommendations that the FOIA Advisory Committee has made. We recommended that Congress ask GAO to pinpoint systemic and or specific compliance issues at agencies that Congress could then address. And we were really pleased to see that Senator Durbin, Grassley, yourself, and Senator Cornyn, along with Chairman Carolyn Maloney and Ranking Member James Comer, tasked GAO earlier this month to conduct a government-wide survey, convening focus groups of a representative sample of FOIA officials to examine FOIA backlogs. So that is very, very welcome. The FOIA Advisory Committee also recommended that Congress address funding and resources for agency FOIA programs. And so we recommended that you ask GAO again to conduct a study of funding for agency FOIA programs, which we believe is deficient and would really help agencies tackle their backlogs and help FOIA professionals. And I just want to add one other thing, Senator, which is one other thing that I think is very important for us to keep in mind is that at a majority of agencies, really most agencies, other than the National Archives and Records Administration, FOIA is not the primary mission of that agency. So as a result, what we see is that FOIA programs do not receive the needed attention and funding that they probably deserve. So we would really like to see that focus shift in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Director McTeague, the same question.
Yes, Senator Leahy. In our most recent report, we made a recommendation to OIP. As we've been talking about today, FOIA is all about transparency and information so that citizens can have a better understanding of their government. Our recommendation to OIP was to take a look at the reporting that agencies do in terms of the FOIA activity and come up with ways to highlight or identify emerging trends, such as litigation that we talked about, such as unusual requests. And with that information, OIP, agencies, and the Congress, this committee can, respond to those emergent challenges. And they vary over time and they vary by agency, but with better information available to this committee and the public, we can then target any responses that could help the overall FOIA process.
Thank you very much. As I said, I'll leave the record open. There will be some other questions for the record, and certainly, one, I appreciate all three of you being here, and if you, looking back over it, there's additions you want to make to any of your answers, the record's open for that too. With that, we stand in recess.
I shared the wrong picture. Anyone that sits in the trucking industry, you may be curious because I'm working on a pretty big story that's going to cause some heads to roll, I think. Hearing an echo. But yeah. Nice little quick hearing. Don't really have anything else for you. Not right now. I'm trying to think of, I don't want to do it yet. So, yeah, I don't even know what I was going to say. Because I'm working on a story, okay? And for anyone in the trucking industry, this you're going to be like, wait a second, this is some shady shit. And anyone that works for a big broker right now, you're going to want to read this story I'm putting out on Capacity today here in a few minutes. Because you're really going to want to. There are other hearings, but there's not a lot going on right now. And there's no real good hearings. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kill the social media feeds. I'll be live tonight as well, even though I didn't really want to. But I'll be live tonight, probably. I may do something different. I may do an episode of Capacity today. The first episode of that new podcast that I'm doing. Because there's a lot of weird stories that are going around. And so I think it would behoove me to actually start talking about trucking more. But I don't know. I haven't decided yet because I'm not quite prepared for it. Like I need to change this background back here and make it like a highway, or maybe shipping containers or something like that, because it's a green screen, so I can do it. It's fucking fantastic. My wall, actually, it's not the wall anymore. Like, you can't even tell, right? It looks like the wall, except it's much better. Check this shit out. I actually just replaced the wall with a green screen this morning. Bam, check that out. Dope as shit. Dope as shit. I don't care who you are right there. That shit is dope as shit. Some said, cool guy, Steve, nice shirt. Yeah, it is. I know. For anyone that didn't catch the announcement yesterday, we're opening our first coffee shop. And I was saying late summer, early fall, but it may happen sooner because our commercial realtor is like, hey, if you're not looking for like a long-term one, you're looking for like 2 years and until you build out or whatever, I may have a spot for you that you may be able to get for cheap. So I said, if we can get that number, sign me up. So I'll have to do a lot of work. I may do like a yeeter, like come and work time, so we can, this is a restaurant, so we'd have to tear down the restaurant and build everything around it, but it may be fun. But if you're interested in having your name on the wall of yeeters, it's kind of like a wall of fame, right? But it's a wall of yeeters. It's people that are helping me open this first store. For anyone that didn't catch it, I'm not telling you how I'm doing it, but we are going to be the first coffee shop in the world to give away cups of coffee every day. You come in, your coffee's free. And I know it doesn't make sense to you, but it does to me. And that's all I'm saying. So it'll probably explode. Like, it'll probably be a really big thing. And the fact is, we're donating 15 cents for every cup of coffee sold as well. So it's going to be pretty cool. So what I ended up doing is I created this thing. If you go to puretruthcoffee.com and you click up at the top, you'll see a locations tab. That tells you a little bit about the store. It talks about the wall of yeeters. And what we're doing, instead of going to investors or getting loans, even though I'm probably just going to do a loan anyway, a personal loan to get it all done, but I'm not giving away any portion of this company because it's going to make so much money, but we're crowdfunding it essentially. So you can sign up. You can do a coffee for life. It's $2,500 and it gets you 5 pounds of coffee delivered to your door every single month for the rest of your life. That's a pretty good deal. We also have a $500 wall of yeeter, like opening party one, and then $150 gets you coffee, gets you a shirt, also gets your name up. And what we're doing is we're doing this black acrylic glass. I already found it, and I've been looking at this for a long time because I wanted to do it here. But it's a black acrylic glass, and then I'm going to have all the names written in with red, like etched into the glass, but then it will be red. So it's going to fucking pop and look dope as shit. And if you can't tell, I like dark colored backgrounds like that. So, the store may look very similar to that because I just like the dark ones. So, but you can check that. April just put the link in all the chats, puretruthcoffee.com/collections/backer-collection, or just go to puretruthcoffee.com and click on locations. You could do it. You don't need to. Your name's not going to be on there unless you do that, unless you're, one of our founders, because we'll all be on there as well. But yeah, if you want your name up in this and you want to support it and all that stuff, and I can't say, will you get free coffee for life at this location, because everyone will get free coffee for life at these locations based on the new strategy we're doing. And it's a game changer. I tell you what, this shit's a game changer. It is by far the best business, and I've been pretty successful at this stuff, but this is by far the best business decision and idea that I've ever had. And it's not that expensive. Like, because we're not making crappuccinos and all, floppa flames and all that shit. No, we're just doing coffee, maybe a couple of pastries. We're not doing any of that fancy stuff. And so it's literally the best idea, the low overhead to actually do it, unless I get this place. If I get this restaurant that we're looking at, then the overhead's a little bit more because I have to tear down the old restaurant and build around it. But it'll be pretty dope. Check it out, puretruthcoffee.com. Click on the locations tab, and then you can do it. Jen Psaki and the deputy press secretary are all out on their 6th. So some other bonehead, I think it's a Whitehouse chief communications person, is doing their press conference. So I'm not going to cover that. If there is anything that happens today, I will do it. But right now I'm working on Capacity Today, an article regarding this big trucking app that not really a great idea. And then a bunch of other stuff. today. So I will see you guys all mañana, or no, tonight. And tonight may just be a fuck it, I'm done. I don't know what tonight's going to bring. Who knows? Who knows? Maybe I'll go to the gym. Fuck, I don't have any shorts here. I do at the old house. Maybe I'll go to the gym today. I haven't gone to the gym since we moved. Is that true? Or did I go last week and do bench? I think I went last week. Because I'm looking at my arms in this and I'm like, man, my arms look small. I mean, in comparison, I can't show that. So here's the spray bottle. You can't see the whole spray bottle, but my arms still pretty fucking big, but they feel small to me. So I need to go to the gym and get a good pump on. You know, it does a lot. It makes me happy. So anyway, but check it out, puretruthcoffee.com/locations. I'll be live at 8 o'clock tonight. What I am going to do for everybody that's watching on Citizen Stringer, you're going to have these oldies but goodies, new ones that you haven't seen. It's just a 250 title playlist. So we're just going through it. It's pretty rad. And then we will see everybody else. Someone said, off to perform my morning constitutional. I normally do this when Steve mentions cutting off social media. See, and here's the thing. My wife, because a lot of you guys are like, Steve, why are you on social media? You said you're not going to be on here. Oh, you keep going back and forth, blah, blah, blah. My wife said I should go live on social media, even if I hate it and even if we have trolls and all that, because she's like, pick on people. She's like, your viewers want that. They want you to be mean to them. And I'm like, do they? Do they? I think they do. Anyway, I'll see you guys tonight, 8 o'clock Eastern time. I will be doing a show. I just made up that determination. I will be doing it. And I'm going to go especially hard on you YouTubers tonight. So, put your big boy pants on, or big girl pants if you're, chick. All right, bye. Oh, wait. I said bye to Citizen Stringer before you. Bye.